Hello, everybody. Thank you so much and welcome to another webinar in our Moving Forward series here in LAMPS and York University. I am Dean JJ McMurtry of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, and I want to start by thanking the team of people from my office who have been working hard to put this webinar and this series together. And of course, a special welcome to our guest panelists, and thank you also to our wonderful host, Sean Courage. You'll be hearing more from all of them shortly. I'd like to acknowledge to start the fact that many of us, wherever we are in Toronto, across Canada, or around the world, are sitting on the traditional territories of different Indigenous peoples. Although we aren't all in the same location, we recognize many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So welcome again to our guests and to everybody joining us here on Zoom to the next chapter of our Moving Forward webinar series. During this panel, we will hear from 3 successful grads of our history department who have joined us to share career and life advice. And if at any time you need help with this experience or have questions for the panelists about the content, feel free to click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Our team is here and ready to help you. So enough from me. I'd like to hand it over to Associate Dean Sean Courage now, who will introduce our guests. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, JJ, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for the next session of interviews with some of our alumni from LAMPS. And I am very pleased to get to host this one because this one features a panel of successful alumni from our history program. I'm the Associate Dean for Programs for the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, but I'm also a professor of history from the Department of History, and I'm also an alumni from York History, where I did my graduate studies. So we actually have 5 York History alumni on here and 4 successful ones. I'm going to start to introduce everyone, and we'll go one by one and ask our panelists to turn on their cameras here. We're going to start with Kristen Buckley. Kristen, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, great. Kristen, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kristen Buckley. I graduated with an MA in history from York University many moons ago. I am the Associate Vice President of Government Partnerships and Service Programs at Kids Help Phone. Kids Help Phone is Canada's 24/7 national support service offering professional counseling and text-based support. And my role really involves partnership and program implementation and development. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for being here. Our second panelist is Karen Carter. Hi, Karen.
Hi there. How are you?
Doing good.
Thanks for the opportunity. As you said, my name is Karen Carter. I am the co-founder of the gallery I'm sitting in, BAND Gallery, which stands for Black Artists Networks and Dialogue. Also founding executive director of Museum of Toronto. So I parlayed my history and education degree. I did the concurrent education program alongside my history degree at York, like Christian, a few moons ago, and turned that into a career in the arts and culture and museum sector. Looking forward to the conversation.
Our third panelist is Frank Cianciulli. Frank, hi.
Hi there. Frank graduated with a BA in history back in 1997. Original plan was to be a lawyer, but during my undergrad, I got inspired, started my first entrepreneurial venture, and since then became sort of a serial entrepreneur, CEO of called the Wish Group of Companies, which is a collection of telecom, HR, media, and tech companies headquartered here in Toronto, but with offices across North America.
So we got an entrepreneur, but we do have a lawyer, Tanya Rocca.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tanya Rocca. I graduated from York in 2009, having done an honors degree, a double major in history and law and society program. I am currently senior corporate counsel at Ontario Power Generation, which is one of North America. I joined that organization about 2 years ago after having practiced litigation at a large base rate firm for about 8 years prior. So in my career, I've done private practice litigation and now kind of done a 180 flip into being a corporate lawyer in the corporate sphere. So thanks very much for having us all today. I'm excited for today's discussion.
Great. So this is an excellent panel of all wonderful and successful history graduates. We've learned very quickly here what everybody does now, and so I wondered if we could start the conversation, kind of connecting what you got in your history degrees and how they might have prepared you for the career paths that you ended up in. And maybe we'll start with Kristen.
Sure. So I actually did my undergrad with a focus on Canadian history as well. And we were talking in some of the introductory opportunities with the panelists. I had shared, I just continued really doing something I liked. And oftentimes when you like something, you're good at it. And I've found that the skills in terms of research, a source and fact verification, solid writing skills that I honed both in my undergrad and then at York in my master's really have served me well in my career. And so I find that if you really stick to something that you're enjoying and that you tend to be good at, particularly when it comes to history, I find that you can't go wrong with those skills in any career format. And I think this panel speaks to that.
Karen, your role in Myseum, I think, has very direct connections to your history education. Could you tell us a little bit about where you saw the linkages from your history degree to your career?
I spent most of my career trajectory working on the history museum side and volunteering on the art museum side and the cultural space side. So the opportunity with Myseum to create a museum without walls, because we all know, because we live in Toronto, that this city does not have a history museum, it's one of the few cities of its size globally where you can't go and see the background on the story of the city in a place. And so the opportunity to work with the founding board team, which included people like the Honorable David Crombie and the family who put the financial support behind it, Stephen Smith and Diane Blake, to create a museum without walls, I think partly came from the fact that it was and is a history museum. So it was about telling local stories and giving the opportunity for all those diverse voices to come to the table. And similar to what Christian said, that ability to write, to critically think, I kind of feel like there's this sadness around liberal arts degrees being given like a bad rap lately, everyone's specializing. And I think that my history degree has allowed me to just navigate different spaces and engage with people in different ways with curiosity and with an interest in helping to bring those stories forward. And that was a key driver with what we did with Myseum.
And Frank, did you find similar things in terms of what you got from your history degree and how it maybe prepared you for moving into entrepreneurship?
Absolutely, although I had no idea that would be the case. I mean, I chose my history degree just because I was intrigued with it, and it was one of my favorite courses back in high school. And the plan was to be a lawyer, so it wasn't even a prerequisite, but looking back now at some of the reasons why I was so successful, I think I can actually probably attribute a lot of them back to the studying of the history. Building an organization, probably the most important component is finding people, good quality people. But what defines quality people, and understanding and assessing talent? We often say from a recruitment perspective is past behavior is the best indication of future behavior. But understanding history helps you understand how others view the world differently. So especially being in Toronto, one of the most diverse countries in the world, I studied all of them. I did Canadian, American, Aboriginal, European, Indian history. So I think, a lot of reasons I've been successful has been able to relate to so many different people. And I think actually studying those cultures has helped me become relatable. And then just the actual work ethic and, gathering information, understanding the source and perspective is, well, especially in these days, in these times with, trying to navigate facts, sources with social media and, all the conspiracy theories that are out there. So I think a lot of that, understanding how to really analyze the source from where it's coming from has served me well, just generally. I can go on and on. There's a lot of
Oh, we will. I've got more questions, but I wanted Tanya to have a chance to jump in here on this. Tanya, you ended up going into law, and your degrees were in history and in law and society. Did you see that part of your education preparing you for your future career?
Hands down, absolutely. So law was always in my forecast. I actually quite hated history in high school. I thought it was really boring and it wasn't my jam. But the reason I chose history for my undergrad ultimately was because, similar to what Karen had touched upon, was stories, right? And understanding stories and diversity. And that is what really appealed to me about history. And also I loved reading, and I thought this is going to be a program that's going to allow me to learn how to read, learn how to write well, hone those critical analysis skills. And as Kristen and Frank have also touched upon, understanding how to ask questions, how to critically analyze. For me, even just the subject of what is history raises the question of, well, whose history are we talking about? We're probably talking about a winner that drafted a history and left some people out. So being able to acknowledge that and understand this is probably one kind of person's history and what does that mean for everyone is very important in really any career path, any circumstance that you're in, is to be able to think critically, apply those skills. And for me, that has translated throughout my entire career. So obviously, if I'm thinking specifically about litigation, I need to be very critical in not just, what is the other side telling me? What's my client telling me? Are they being upfront with me? How do I navigate the story of this case to get my point across and to understand and to do it well? And also just in now corporate world, it's those skills that can be applied no matter where your career takes you. And for me, my career, I always thought I was going to be a litigator and that was going to be it forever. And I recently did have a change that I would have never predicted. So I think sometimes, to Karen's point of it gets a bad rap, this general degree, it actually positions you very well to be able to chart your own course in life. And when you think about, who's successful, you have to understand that you are the author of your own success and you are going to define what success means to you at the different stages of your life. Because what you think is success sitting, in your history class at York may not be the same 5, 10, 15 years from now, but the skills that you are getting can allow you to choose any path that you want.
I want to talk a little bit about those skills because it's a conversation that we have in our classrooms. It's a conversation that I have with prospective students who are looking at programs that we offer at York and trying to make decisions about where they're going to start their educations. I want to take advantage of the opportunity to have a panel of graduates here to tell us a little bit about how they see critical liberal arts skills in the workplace. Like, where do you see this in your own career paths among your coworkers? What does it look like to have these kinds of critical skills in the workplace? And Karen, I don't know if you wanted to start on that.
Sure. Working in the arts and culture sector, the ability to write, critically think, and research is the core. It's like the core meat of your ability to navigate any space across the sector, because as others have said, that sense of understanding history, not only from a personal standpoint of if you're speaking to somebody and they've come to you with an interest, let's say to do an exhibition, and they're passionate about it because they're interested in, telling their Italian cultural story or their South Asian community story, their Tamil story, their Jamaican story. the awareness of what that means within the context of even the word history, which for me, you deduce that and it's his story. It's like, where's her story, and who were the hymns, who were the persons, who were the male, as we know, because a lot of historic record is based on male perspective, how to come to that with an awareness of what that desire is for a community member to maybe partner and collaborate on something, maybe the gaps in their quote unquote formal education, maybe they're not a formal curator or a formal art historian, but they're willing to do the research, they can write, and they've got great critical thinking skills. So I think that assessment of those core needs for me has made me very willing to take risks in things like a museum, or even in the construction of band, where you're not creating cultural and community organizations that are dependent on people who are maybe at the top of the hierarchy of knowledge, but you're aware that you need to have a sense of the grassroots community voices and your knowledge of what the core elements are around knowledge keeping and storytelling, for me, comes at the core of that history degree and liberal arts degree, which is, if you can write, if you can critically think, you're essentially able to, and do some good analysis, you're essentially able to play in cultural space, and sometimes not having that specific degree of art history or anthropology may actually allow you to be more open, right, to these different ideas and different perspectives that have not been formally assessed or pigeonholed you into one pocket. I think that there's an empathy that comes with an awareness of the fact that people's stories and their history, whether they're even aware of it or not, is rooted in the past, and that the past consistently impacts the present, whether we're conscious of it or not. It's everything from, just before this call, I was on a call with the folks at Lord Cultural Resources about this project, where an institution with an old Massey building is looking to do programming to engage the public. And it's that sense of, when you approach that building, what's the history that comes to mind, consciously or subconsciously? Because we know architecture has history laced through it. You think of different things maybe when you're in a contemporary open space than you are in a kind of monumental pillared space that has all of these implications around who built it, when it was built, where the money came from, all of those layers that, if you unpack, makes you conscious of what you're stepping into, how you engage with community, how people may or may not respond to you, how open they are or they are not. I think all of that has been essential for me in the things I've helped to create, but also in helping to create space for other people to be present and to feel that they're included in the narrative threads, frankly, of our lives and our common humanity.
I find it really encouraging to hear this, because these are exactly the kinds of conversations we have in the classroom with current students. Kristen, do you see critical liberal arts skills in your workplace as well?
Absolutely. So we, as an organization that's preparing information and sharing information with with young people across Canada, it is non-judgmental, it is non-biased. But we are cultivating that information and sharing it with young people. So we got to verify it. So whether, I think back to, spending many moons in the library, looking at more historical text and finding, doing bibliographies and like, why did I choose these sources for this paper? Well, we're still validating whether it's current information or historical information. You need to verify it and validate it. So when we're looking at data and statistics across Canada, they'll often say, but where are your sources? What are the sources? And we need to be transparent about them. We're young people, they might just be reading the content on the website, but when we're working with a partner, they might say, well, where did you get that information from? And it has to be there. And we won't publicize it unless it is there. And so those critical analysis skills, but also searching for those resources, but also more than one. looking at several different resources and comparing the information and making sure you're even providing a nuanced understanding of it. So absolutely, I see it every day. I work closely with clinicians doing that research, as well as we have a number of information and library science grads as well. And so it's been an incredible part of my day-to-day career, is knowing how to do that.
And Frank, I'm assuming there's similar things that you might see in your sector and from an entrepreneurial perspective in terms of liberal arts skills being deployed in the workplace.
That's an interesting question. It reminds me when I was going through university and doing my undergrad, arguing with my father about how I felt you don't really need a university degree. You don't need to complete one. My perspective changed almost immediately when I started building businesses and hiring and managing people. And you're just observing, quite honestly, those who had an arts degree, the differences. And trying to say this carefully, but I mean, from work ethic, being resourceful, just having staying power to finish projects. And probably the most important thing ultimately is the ability to learn. And because that's what differentiates, those that have a desire or want to continue to advance their careers and grow, are their ability to learn and comprehend information, obviously articulate that. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've had thousands of people. We also own some of the largest staffing companies in the country. So always talking to recruiters, that's the difference. And, that's where that degree does make a difference. And I never would have had this perspective, I don't think, if I hadn't been in a process where I've interviewed and hired thousands of people.
That's a really valuable perspective. I hope the students who are attending listen carefully here. And I'm getting the sense that there's a kind of adaptability to liberal arts skills. Tanya, do you see that in your workplace? Does liberal arts education prepare people you work with or even yourself for the kinds of challenges that you face in your career?
I think so, because it has that general aspect where there's so much kind of, it's like a big buffet, right? You just pick what's your flavor. There's so much opportunity for learning in different areas. And so that allows you to build those adaptability skills, which, working with students, working with juniors, to me, that's critical, is can you adapt to a changing circumstance? At OPG on our legal team, I think it's obvious how those kind of research, writing, critical analysis skills come into play when I'm asking a student to research an area of the law and report back on how it applies to the circumstances. But what I will say that, maybe earlier on in my career would have surprised me is how much those skills show up in a corporate setting and in a business setting. So when you think sometimes of liberal arts and it's this kind of a career path, or I see how it fits into law. People don't generally think, oh, liberal arts, I can get into business. I can be an asset and a value add in the business context. And I've actually seen that, and I can see how those skills, when I'm thinking of a large overhaul, we have hydroelectric generating stations that need to be maintained and overhauled. That's a huge project. That is looking at how are we doing it? How do we continue to make money? How do we, deal with safety in the area? How do we properly consult with our Indigenous partners in the area? And you see all of those skills really coming into play in how we consult with our partners, in how we're planning, thinking of all the essays I've written. It's like, okay, what's my strategy? I need a plan, I need my outline. I'm doing that for a corporate project. I'm looking at, okay, what's my plan? What are my opportunities that might arise that I want to capitalize on? What are some risks that I need to think about and strategize if they materialize? How are we going to react and be adaptable to that? And that to me is allowing for opportunities for success in a corporate business setting that is not traditionally what people would think of as something you can do with your history skills, but frankly, you can, and I'm doing it.
I can't wait till I have the next opportunity to tell a student that they're going to need to be able to prepare for their essays if they ever want to build a power generation station. That's
or any
great.
project, but any project, right? That
Yeah.
that ability to strategize, to have a plan, to think of what might go wrong, to think of what might go right, be willing to take risks, to not have, fear color how you're acting because you don't know how to plan for things that might not be what you're expecting. So I think
Mhm.
having those reading, planning, thinking, critical analysis, strategy skills that you build early on, it will serve you in all aspects of any career.
And Karen, I'm glad that you mentioned empathy, because this is something that we try to teach in history courses, because we're thinking about people in the past. And I think it's easy to caricature the choices that people make and to not see them as ourselves, and to not appreciate that their lives were as complex and sometimes contradictory as our own. And that when people make choices, they're often doing it for reasons that they think are good for their families, for themselves, for their communities. But people also lie and are selfish and make mistakes. And I think that kind of empathy is something you learn by thinking about the past and thinking about time and thinking about how change works over time.
Yeah, I've been lucky in my career to be able to work at, as I said, at senior levels, to build things from scratch and to run things where I'm often being asked in interviews by people like Frank about, your skill sets and how it is you go about managing people, and how you would deal with issues around conflict within the workplace. And I always say that I come to those conversations from a point of, I actually believe that, as you said, most people don't get up in the morning to go to work to tear the house down. They get up because they want to pay their bills, they want to look after their families or themselves, they want to do a good job, and that's why they're there. And so if you come to those issues with that in mind, and then you're forced to do some of that analysis, think about their personal history, because hopefully you've gotten to know them. And in cultural environments, we claim to be spaces where you get to show up to work with your whole self. We get to be intersectional. So with that in mind, it's that sense of, how does that sense, as stated previously, around critical analysis of thinking about not just this, maybe this one bad moment, but what context is that moment happening in, which may allow you to be more empathetic in dealing with that issue. And even sometimes in recognizing that you're in a powerful position, and sometimes that person just needs to have a moment to vent and apologize, and you just let it go because you're thinking about your common humanity and trying to move forward. I also think in this moment, where Black Lives Matter and issues around race and cultural identity and all of the complex layers around racism and anti-racism, as it reflects not just Black communities, but BIPOC communities, that idea of research and analysis and an understanding of history and different stories also factors into those moments where sometimes you have to think about, are you actually creating environments for the employees that you work with or the colleagues you collaborate with that is having some understanding of how all of those things that are happening publicly in the community could also factor. You know what I mean? It's simple things like we're online and there's almost this assumption that everybody has access to equal internet when you're working. So how are you thinking about those things in your common humanity? And yeah, it's I think most people I know who I've met who come with those liberal arts degrees enter the world with an interest in making the world a better place in their own little small way. And it doesn't mean we're all running to become politicians. To some extent, we're sometimes better at making the world a better place by being a lawyer or a business owner or a public servant in ways that allows you to just do your bit in your corner of the world. And I think we often at least come with an awareness of our own particular bias because of that sense of history and the complexities of it, which I think helps us lead better. And that's honestly, I believe, I think for the people, the friends and colleagues that I know, the ones who have liberal arts degrees sort of come to that sense. It's almost like your awareness of history and culture broadly makes you more aware of everything is not necessarily what it seems. You usually have to dig and unpack to get to the heart of an issue that allows you to deal with whatever the issue is, whether you're dealing with a business or a local grassroots community project, just to come to that engagement with a sense of empathy for the people you're working with.
So we're starting to get questions in from the audience, and I'd invite anybody who's watching the live session here to use the Q&A tool just down at the bottom of the screen to post your questions, and I'll relay those over to the panel, and we'll let some of those come in. But I did want to have a little bit of a discussion about career pathways. My pathway on this panel was pretty straightforward and probably the worst of the group here. I did 3 degrees in history and then became a historian. Do not do that. All right, let's start with Frank. This is something that's, I think, really important for our current students and our recent graduates to hear. How did you go from a history degree into your career? Was it a straight path? Were you out the next day after you graduated into your career? Was there stuff in between?
No, not at all. It was completely accidental, like a lot of people. So I was completing my BA. The plan was to go to Osgoode Law School, and I basically caught the entrepreneurial bug. One of my summer jobs, just something I was good at and I became passionate about. And funny, because one of the courses I was taking was maybe an introduction to administrative studies, something like that. But they were talking about culture and organizational behavior, which was different than the history and poli-sci courses I was taking. And perfect timing. With the summer job, I didn't want to stop, so I carried on and I finished my degree. At the time was I forgot what we called it. I'd be dating myself. The evening courses at the time. Forgot the call.
At Atkinson.
That's Atkinson.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, because I had the blinkers on at that time, just thinking about being a lawyer. So it was interesting that one course at the right time, with a particular summer job. And, so therefore, as I was completing my degree, my perspective had changed, and applying what I was learning to a different, without the, pathway to being a lawyer. So it was an interesting pivot. And being in that liberal arts program, provided courses like that gave me that as opposed to, BCom and thinking about MBAs. I'm actually happy I did. I mean, you often hear entrepreneurs talking about, being almost glad they didn't, take an MBA.
It speaks to keeping your mind open while you're in your studies, both within your formal studies as well as the kind of extracurricular activities that you're engaged in. If you volunteer in your community, if you work at a part-time job. Tanya, what about your path? You were in history and law and society. How did you end up in your career?
So it was supposed to be a 4-year honors program. I stretched it intentionally into 5 years so that I could have.
Not a bad choice.
It worked for me. So, I worked throughout my undergrad life. I was the first in my family to be going to university and having eyes on postgraduate beyond that, law school. I, raised by a single mom. I had one other sibling and was the first one. So obviously felt a lot of pressure to do really well, but had to work. That was my personal circumstance. So I stretched that out so that I could save some more money. Did a little bit of traveling in that 5th year that had a little bit of a lighter course load. And then it was, okay, law school is next. The kind of glitch or the impact at that point in my career and life was I was always Toronto based. I went to York for undergrad. My intention was to stay in Toronto for law school, and that didn't work out. So at the time, it felt like a huge failure to not get in to where I wanted to be. And I'm like, they don't want me. Why? And it felt like the end of the world at the time. And, I did get in early acceptance at another great institution that, when I look at it now, was a wonderful opportunity and critical to a lot of success that I had in law school and thereafter. And I raise that just because I think it's important, if you can learn this lesson as early as possible, to understand that failure is critical to success. And it sounds very strange to say that and hear that, but you will have moments in your life where you will fail and it will feel like the end of the world. And really, I encourage you to look at that as a door opening to some other kind of opportunity. I have a 4 and 6-year-old, as you might tell by my background. And really, I try to emphasize with them that to fail is really a first attempt in learning. And to keep that with you as early on in your career, and to take those opportunities as they come and take those failures and the bruised ego that comes with a failure as really a battle scar that you can wear with pride that will help you in whatever is coming next, because something great is coming. You might not just see it when you're like crying and eating ice cream, as I was doing. But then, I did get into a law school. If I hadn't, I would have tried again. I did terribly, in my opinion, on the first LSAT, but I tried again and then got on a plane for a little vacation afterwards. And then, was successful in interviews and getting a job at a firm that I spent quite a long time at because it was a really wonderful place. So that's kind of a bit of insight into my career path and the stumbles I've had throughout that turned out really well.
That's great. Kristen, you want to tell us a little bit about your pathway?
Sure. So prior to coming to York, where I had done my master's in history, when I was doing my undergraduate, I was having a conversation with a professor because I hadn't really decided what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I wasn't really, I enjoyed learning and I enjoyed what I was studying. And he said to me, well, why don't you just keep studying? And I was like Tanya, I was the first in my family to go to post-secondary. And I kind of sort of felt like I had to know what my job was like. And I won't ever forget the look on my dad's face when I told him that I wanted to continue. And quite frankly, though, the tuition at York was very reasonable. So I just continued on that journey. And I've always been interested in understanding the history of people whose histories aren't often told. And when I applied to York, I shared that as an interest and it was embraced. Not all of my applications were accepted, but I think it was fate because I got to study that more at York. And, I really appreciated a lot of what Karen had said, because I feel like that approach has brought some empathy into my career and into my life. But when I was finishing at York, still wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up. My dad was very practical and was like, what about going into law? And I wasn't sure. And, I continued my studies. I actually have an additional master's degree, but where I entered into that was I saw a role at York that interested me. It was the archivist. And I went to him. I was doing part of my research there. And I thought to myself, how does someone get into that role? So I decided to ask. I was so nervous. And why I share this story is if you see a role that interests you, ask them how they got there. And hopefully they will share the same kind of information and kindness that person shared with me, because he shared a program and a opportunity for study that I didn't even know existed. And it was absolutely set me up on my next set in my career. So that was in information and library science. And yes, I did study archives. And no, I don't really do archives at Kids Help Phone, but all those I continue to hone those critical analysis skills. I still had an interest in understanding the history of people who whose history isn't told. A big part of my portfolio at Kids Help Phone is the work we are doing to better support the Indigenous young people that contact our service. And I feel like I come to that with, I don't know it all, but I've spent some time studying it. My mind is open. I often said I was working with an elder and I said, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm hoping that you'll help me and our organization on our journey, because we're in a non-Indigenous organization. So I guess, where I am now is if somebody asks me, how did you get into that role? I think back to that archivist, that professor who answered my questions. And so if I can answer some questions for someone and hopefully they're helpful and pay that forward. So my piece of advice here is, as you're trying to figure out what your path is, because unlike both of my parents who worked the same job for their entire life, that's not going to be the case for us and my generation, for your generation. So when you see something that interests you, ask, how did you get there? Because you might be opened up to a pathway that you didn't even know existed. But I really do feel like a liberal arts education is going to get you one more step into that path.
That's really good advice. Karen, do you want to tell us a little bit about your path from history degree to career?
I did a history degree, and as I said, a concurrent education degree. So I'm the immigrant kids or the immigrant parent kid narrative of my degree was really about my father being able to say, this is what Karen's doing, because they need to be able to tell someone. I always knew I wanted to do something in the arts, but the guidance counselors don't tell you that you could be a museum director. That wasn't on the list of options. So the education degree, and I was always curious about history, so that was easy. And then the education degree was because it was lawyer, doctor, engineer, accountant. Like, you get a list, and it was like, pick one. Because I didn't come to this cold country for you to decide you want to sort of be in the arts. It was pretty much my dad's running story. And it's funny because I left home at 18, but their voice remains in your head. So even though I wasn't living at home and going to school part-time, so it took me a long stretch to do the concurrent degree and the history degree. I left for a couple of years in between. Just because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I didn't see the point of finishing a degree and being like, what am I going to do with this? And I knew I wanted to work in culture. So I was lucky at the time that there was this organization, CANBI, Canadian Artists Network, Black Artists in Action. And I inserted myself in this thing called Salafi in '97 and just started volunteering and just figured out, oh, these are my people. These are the people who, do exhibitions and present artists. And that was my jam. That was where I wanted to be. And so I finished the degree, and a few years ago, by this time I was running Heritage Toronto. So I had done that time with them, and then finished school, worked with the organization for a bit, but it was kind of had served its time, and it was basically dying. And to my colleagues on the talks point, and I love that. I'm forever going to remember fail as first attempt at learning. I'm keeping that, Tanya. I've literally written it down on a sticky note. That organization dying under my 20-something naive sense that I could run something with zero experience was a hard lesson. There was a couple of times of crying at my desk, but then you shake it off and you're like, okay. There was a woman who's a senior artist who lives in Belize right now, Winsome, who said to me, this isn't your mess to clean up. Like, go get some experience, learn what it means to work as an arts and culture professional on the business side, and then come back and maybe build something. So BAND is actually a direct response to having watched that fail and trying to build something that was more long term and that could serve artists nationally, locally, and internationally in the Black communities. So it was kind of finishing the degree, inserting myself in that work to volunteer, and then doing some things. I worked at Harborfront Center in School by the Water. That's the only teaching I did for years. And then later, and it was actually cool because I thought this I could do. I could be a field trip teacher and know what the curriculum requirements are for education. And I did the urban studies, which is more about the history component of the program at Harborfront. And then after that, I took a pivot to do my MA, which I did at a different institution, and got stuck in a portal of insanity at SARS because I was working in healthcare, and it was insanity. And again, that was where you kind of know that your liberal arts degree, it allowed me to just pivot. I was sourcing supplies for within the pandemic and organizing like 300-400 staff and deploying them to deliver supplies across 2 institutions. It was insane, but it was all of this, like, you make a plan, you have your list, you do the research, and you hit go, and you let people, you trust that they know what they're doing, and you're there to troubleshoot. But I felt very comfortable in that environment, I think, because of the things around critical thinking, analysis, and planning and research that came out of my degree. I eventually got back into the art scene and spent some time at Canadian Heritage because I always wanted to make sure I understood how the funding side worked. And then ended up at the city, worked on the last attempt where they tried to build, I don't know if you remember, the museum at the Canada Malting Silos. I was the staff lead on that when they were looking at that site. And when it became clear that wasn't going anywhere, I was like, I need to do something because I can't be here and not have an outcome that can help my next career move. So we built a website, and that was where that first process of understanding how giving validity and opportunity for community voice and connecting that to objects in the city's collection really was an interesting learning curve for me, because I then parlayed that into my first executive director role, which is at Heritage Toronto. And then from Heritage Toronto, Museum, and all along the time at Heritage Toronto, BAND was being built on the volunteer side. So I think, like some others on the panel, and I think just people we know in life, most of us are not ending up with, you finish the degree, you go get the one job and you get to be there forever. Those days are done and gone. And I won't say that I lament that, because I like the different experiences I've had. I've met people on that path that I think have made me better at what I do now professionally. And that has made my presence in the arts and culture sector much richer, because I really have a sense of not just what that sector means, but what that means as it bookends as an important part of overall community building. I think the ecosystem of cities and communities really needs strong arts and culture programming, and everything from what you do in your spare time with your kids or family to just a place to be able to have a sense of a city's awareness or a community's awareness of its core consciousness. So yeah, my path was a bunch of things, a mix of volunteering strategically and jobs, and not being afraid, which I'll say to students and to folks thinking about this program, don't be afraid to use your volunteer work to help you with your paid work, because that for me was always strategically useful, is how do you put those volunteer things sometimes at the front of your resume, because it helps you show the employer that you're qualified to do that job.
So thank you so much for each of these stories. We do have questions now from the audience, but I did want to make sure that we got that out there because the key point here about the non-linearity of pathways from education to career is really important. And it's not always obvious, especially when you're starting your undergraduate education, what the future possibly looks like. And when you start to not be able to see a linear pathway, I think it can produce a lot of anxiety, especially for students in their senior year or recently graduated students. Okay, so I'm going to try to pick up some of these questions here. We've talked a little bit about further education, but we've got two questions here asking about recommendations for further education after a history degree, and a specific question about pursuing a Master's of Information, like at the U of T iSchool or Library and Museum Studies. Kristen, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that as you did archival studies.
Yeah, so I graduated from the U of T's iSchool, and it was like, I don't know how to put this. When I was doing my undergrad and I was focusing on history, it's like big giant classes, right? And you're sharing an interest with students, but like some are there because it's their undergrad, and then others are there because they really like it. Then you get into your master's and it's like a smaller group and they're even more interested. Then I got to U of T and I was like, oh, these are my people. It was like focus, it was like information, doing critical analysis. It's an incredibly practical program. You have to do a practicum. I took everything from how to archive exceptionally old documents and take care of really old paper and photographs. So my mother-in-law took me up on that, actually, to also project management. So they would bring in professionals, like my project management professor was from Deloitte. So there was it was a real spectrum of building on the skills that I had learned in my history degree to further hone critical analysis, fact checking. I love the empowerment that access to information can give to people. And that's what I found everybody there, whether they wanted to be a reference librarian, whether they wanted to work. I had classmates that ended up working in museums. For me, it's a very different organization, but we are providing information to some of Canada's most vulnerable young people. And there was a shared interest there. It's a very practical program, and I highly recommend it. But I have also in my career brought on placement students from the similar program in Montreal, in British Columbia, in London. There's some pretty stellar programs in the information and referral field, and I highly recommend it.
Okay, we've
Can
got
I
another
jump in?
question. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I'll just quickly say, because I taught at the iSchool in the museum
Mhm.
management program because of the stuff I did with my museum. And I will also say that having taught there and taught at Centennial College's museum management, if you're interested specifically in museum and culture, don't dismiss the college program. I think Humber has one as well, and I think Seneca may have one. Just that idea of the critical analysis and writing skills that comes from the university side of things, that you often get more practical skills from the college side, and that with volunteerism, because I was scanning, maybe sort of doing your job, Sean, some of the other questions, that if you're going into museums, don't be afraid to take the chance to volunteer to do some projects, and then look at whether or not that MA or the master's is what makes sense at the time, as opposed to just doing one of those certificate programs that you really do get more practical experience. I'm probably showing my own bias here, but having taught in both of them, I think there's a lot of value to taking the time in the college setting, as opposed to jumping right into the master's, especially in an institution like U of T.
And there's another question about, whether or not a BA in history is a pathway into a Master of Information. And I think it certainly can be. And it's clear that a BA in history is the gateway drug into being interested in information studies and archives, for sure. And a lot of our graduates end up going along that path as well. I'll take one more museum question here, which is a practical question about what the job market is like in the museums and library sector. I don't know if Kristen and Karen have got some insights on that.
I think Karen would be, because I'm not directly in that
Right.
sector. Karen, if you're comfortable with answering
Yeah.
that, I don't want false information.
Sure. I would say it's competitive, but you're at that juncture where you're at the time where there's about to be a large turnover. So for young people coming in, and that's why I say that volunteering and being willing to start at the bottom, or even if you end up with another job, but you're doing this stuff on the side, it's the ability to use the learning you might use in those other jobs to parlay that into how you present it on your resume to get you that entry level position. Because museums right now, because of what's happening with COVID-19 and the limitations on people being able to visit, coupled with the criticism around the way those institutions, especially those collecting institutions, have been built with respect to the presence of cultural acquisitions that are sometimes coming from difficult, challenging scenarios. There's an opportunity for young people coming with the skills that we've talked about here, with that sense of history and who told what history how and how things are acquired, and that sense of empathy. Just the reality check of not fully drinking the Kool-Aid about what might have been the thing that you would have positioned the story that everyone just believed, 10 or 20 years ago in museums. It's a challenging time, but for young people coming in interested in those untold stories and those hidden narratives, it's also an exciting time, and it really is foreshadowing what the next phase of leadership will look like in museums. I think you're probably going to be luckier at small and medium institutions than the mammoth things. There's this analogy I've been watching people use for culture online, which is we're in rough waters, and the ocean liners do not move easily, and your big institutions are the ocean liners, your MoMAs, your ROMs, your British museums, they're ocean liners. So if I were you, I would look for a sailboat or a dinghy, because they can manage rough waters, but they'll also give you the opportunity to be able to experiment and learn, especially from a holistic point about the whole sector, that can really position you for growth and success, and to be a leader in the sector down the road.
I feel like we maybe lost Sean, or he's frozen. So maybe I'll take on. I do see a question about talking about failures and learning about other people's failures being underrated and critical to success. And I think that's a really important topic that doesn't get enough attention. People don't like to acknowledge failure, admit that they made a mistake. And what I would say is, like, if you want to be successful, that is really important. Being able to own your mistakes, acknowledge that I'm going to make mistakes, that's inevitable, but being able to own up to it, fess up, identify the mistake, and not just, report to your superior, I screwed this up, but come with a proposed solution. Have, use your thinking skills to get through and navigate that error, that failure, to turn it into something and make it positive. I think that when you're talking about like what's your greatest skill, like we've talked about critical analysis and how do we do any of this, I think that a big skill that everybody has to practice is to build resilience and to deal. 2020, if it's taught us anything, is resilience is going to get you through pretty much anything, and it is a muscle that needs to be exercised and practiced, and it's about your outlook, right, and how you think about things, and what are the questions that you ask yourself and others, and how do you interact in those spaces. So I would say what's a key skill is learning how to ask questions, ask a lot of questions. If you don't know what to do in a situation, ask a question. That's probably the way forward to have a dialogue with something, to learn with someone, to learn from them, to have a good discussion, trying to convince someone that they need to rethink their position, probably not with a hammer over their head, but maybe asking them a question, engaging in discussion with them. So looking forward at your career, your path, how to navigate choppy waters or smooth sailings, is to really get comfortable with, I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to fail, but I have the skills, have confidence in yourself that you can navigate that and turn it into something positive for yourself. And I think asking questions, engaging with people around you, making sure that the people around you are not just the same people like you, if that makes any sense, but to have diversity in the people that you surround yourself with, so that I think Kristen said earlier, you don't even know what you don't know, right? Like that's your blind spot. So you know what you know. I learned all this. Maybe you can identify what you don't know. It's like, these are the things I want to learn, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't even know you don't know. And those are your blind spots. So engage with people in your personal life, in your work life, who are different than you, who can call you on blind spots, who can shed that light to help you have personal and professional growth and development, to be a success by your own standards, and to give back to the world, right? It's not the entire planet, but think of your circles, your immediate circle, your friend group, your family. You can impact the world in whatever way you want, because you're building great skills. And if you have that confidence, you can do it.
So I got booted out for a second, but I'm back.
We carried on without you. I apologize.
Great.
We just kept talking.
I'm just getting in the way, I think. I just wanted to make sure we got to as many of these questions as we can. We did get a question from the chair of the history department. Were you able to answer that one yet? So Stephen Brooke, who's our current chair of the history department and one of my bosses, wanted to know from your view as alumni, if there was anything that you wish you had got out of your history education, if there were things from your perspective now in your current careers that you wish you had maybe had a little bit more of in your undergraduate education or in your graduate education.
You want to start, Frank? I feel like the ladies have taken over.
No, I don't know. Not that I can really think of.
I mean, Stephen just wants you to say more courses in British history, which is his field, right?
I can try answering. When I look back and I think of my time at York, and do I have any regrets or wishes as to, what opportunities maybe did I not take on or didn't feel were available? So they may have been there, but for me, I was a commuter, so I drove to York. I wasn't on res. I wasn't there all the time. So I feel that in my undergrad, and also I was working, it was, let me get to class, let me, tick off all my academic boxes and boot on out of there, try to beat traffic, get to my job, etc. And what I wish I had done more of, intentionally and focused on, is those extras, right? Like practical things, ways to engage with others and ask questions and learn, to Karen's point of certain courses and the practical element of things gives you a different opportunity for learning and networking and connection. That for me personally, when I look back, that's an opportunity I didn't take enough advantage of. And so if there are, I would expect there's still quite a big commuter population. Now during COVID, everybody's probably commuting from their bedroom to wherever their workspace is. But once people are back at campus, or even now facilitating interactions like these, where you have, abilities to have discussions, take on little practical projects where you can engage with people, I think would be just, icing on the cake and a value add to my it would have been to my learning.
Okay, so we are really close to the end of time here. So I do have to close things out. I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing with us their experiences, their pathways to your careers. This has been, I think, inspiring for our students, certainly inspiring for me as a history educator. For our audience, I wanted to let you know that we've got another webinar coming up on November 24th at noon, from noon to 12:30. It's called How We're Tackling COVID, Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. So it's another conversation with alumni. We'll hope you'll be able to join us for that. You can find the registration link for that now in the chat. And more information about the next webinar and the upcoming moving forward sessions can be found on the LANPS website. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're out of time, and I wish I could keep going for another hour, but this was excellent. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Karen.